right, welcome back to Web3 Whispers, where we talk to the gigabrains and anons that power Web3. I'm Mathias with my co-host Steeb.
Hey guys, today we have Diego from Gradient. Diego, go ahead and introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about, what your path was in crypto, how you got started, and how you ended up with on Gradient.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, so first of all, hey guys, how's it going?
It's going well, man. I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm glad that we got you here, and shout out to Medici for connecting us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I got started in crypto in 2017. I was at the moment, yeah, I mean, yeah, like I was like a sophomore in high school,
Oh wow.
and yeah, and so I was like blown away, right, from day
Mhm.
one, and so I didn't have any money, and my parents did not trust me with their credit cards. Uh, so if I wanted to get crypto, there were there were two paths: either selling drugs or going to like some ATM or some place where I could like put cash and get crypto. So I would just I got my parents to like take me it's like all these ATMs and I bought some crypto and that was pretty sick experience and yeah, and I've just been in the space ever since. Yeah, I mean, I like to think of like having actually started in DeFi with Gradient.
Mhm.
Just to give you guys context. Gradient is the project that I'm working on. It was like
Mhm.
not even, it's so funny. I didn't even. It was not intentional. Like founding Gradient, it was like literally an accident, and now I'm just rolling with it. Like I ended up even dropping out of college for this. So
Yeah, tell us about your accident.
yeah. So I was pretty, I've been really obsessed with NFT finance since October. And so I was like, this is super cool. Wouldn't it be fucking great to, get loans against my pooping ladies or whatever? And so
Classics.
my favorite NFT, dude.
The blue chips against the blue chip
Blue chips.
projects, right? Pooping ladies, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I told a friend about it, and she sent me the link to Abacus bot, and I was like, this is a really interesting concept. So I went on the Discord, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna, I'm working with this DAO to give out loans and NFTs. And honestly, like that DAO had barely had a conversation. So it was like, it was not the like in hindsight, it was a very shitty move. But the thing was that like people began sending like spreading around like my idea, and then I was essentially forced to like do something like execute, and so now here we are.
I
Like
like
I'm
that. So if we learned anything from Diego's accident, it's that you always oversell what you're actually doing, and then maybe you end up on a team, and you kind of have to work for what you get.
no, and even crazier, you may end up in a Web3 podcast. So
Yeah.
yeah,
This has all been by accident. He basically just tripped up into this, just
yeah.
a large set of coincidences, and now Diego's here talking to us about his
Destiny.
project.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah,
that.
no, it is pretty wild.
So tell us about what Gradient is, Diego.
Oh, of course. So I think like there's so many ways in which like there's so many interesting points of view to use for this question. To put it simply, like you know lending at the moment only works to some extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because say let's just I guess pick Aave for the sake of simplicity,
Mm-hmm.
right? You go on Aave, you deposit your token from a given set of tokens, and you get a loan against it.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that work? Well, the reason why it works is Aave, they and like this just happens in TradFi, right? This idea that a bank or like a lender, they take they take a risk every time they give you a loan, and the name of that risk is credit risk, right? They take
Mm-hmm.
the risk of you defaulting on your loan. Now, when that happens, like crypto is a special kind. Like crypto is special in the sense that loans are non-recourse. In that the lender cannot really do anything in case you default, right?
Right. Just take your asset.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
most they can do is liquidate your asset. They cannot go get you I mean, they could try, but that would be kind of
Mhm.
so like that's at most at the moment what lending protocols could do. So now with Aave that works because they say you can only deposit, you can only give us collateral which is pretty liquid. If you default, we can sell the the collateral right away, and we can kind of see because like it's just so liquid that we can use Chainlink to get a price, and then we know that we can kind of see a real-time market price of that, right? So that works from that perspective, right? Because like it's just a really liquid asset, and so the risk of you defaulting and then not being able to sell the collateral for a good amount price is just very low. And even if that's the case, they give 80% LTV for that reason, in case there's like a deficiency balance, that's the technical name. The idea that, if the borrower defaults, you sell the collateral and you cannot get enough money to fully, pay back the full balance of the debt. So that works for fungible, that works for liquid tokens, right? But for NFTs, it's a whole different problem, right? Because, I get somebody gives me, their NFT, and I just have no fucking clue, how much the thing is worth. There are two problems, right? I am forced to speculate, and then even if I were to speculate, right, I would have no guarantees that somebody would buy that NFT from me at that price, right?
Especially if the NFT is like mid-tier, right? Like if we're looking at an NFT class, like if it's not a floor NFT, then like you want to assume that the price is above the floor price, but like at that point it just becomes speculative.
Right. And like you can take it even farther and think of one of ones, or even, think about like bonds, this idea that you could tokenize bonds. And like I find that just a truly mind-blowing concept. The idea that, I could collateralize, I could take a loan against somebody else's bond, like against somebody else's debt. I think that's just one concept. But anyway, it's this idea that, there's an insane, my view is that you represent capital, like, most capital is non-fungible, right? And like I feel like it's just massive. The scale of what you can do if you unlock, say finance for non-fungible tokens, right? So Gradient, in a way, is my bet that you can actually do that. And it's just an experiment in just basically my friends and I just trying to think, how can we actually do this? I am convinced that we can. And so Gradient is just that, our story of, I guess, how we eventually solve it. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about, because I know that it leverages Abacus. So if you could tell us a little bit, and speaking of Abacus, actually Medici just hopped on. So if you could say hi, Medici.
It's a party now.
I'm just here fanboying Diego.
Yeah, Diego's the man. So I gave you a shout out earlier before you hopped on, but thanks again, Medici, for connecting us. We already like Diego a lot, so we're excited for the episode. But yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about how Gradient leverages Abacus?
For sure. So, okay, let's rewind a little and think about risk. Okay, so I give, Mathias a loan, and I am taking, in the case of, say, collateralized lending, and, we could get into how under collateralized lending could work. And like, I think that that's just a full-blown, really fascinating topic. But, let's just go one step at a time, I guess. So, when we give them a loan, we're taking two risks. We're taking, number one, the credit default risk of Mathias, just defaulting on his loan. And then if that's the case, if that's the case, then we take, there's also different kind of loss, which is, different kind of risk, which is our exposure to, the collateral not selling for, his collateral not selling.
It's like liquidation risk, right? Essentially, like
exactly.
the asset that you're repossessing when the borrower defaults on the loan, you're not sure how much it's actually going to be worth when you go to sell it at market.
Exactly, yeah. And in TradFi, they call this thing loss given default, right? And so, so I think that's kind of like why, like the way, like I'm thinking about these problems. And so at the core, as a lending protocol, what you're trying to do is insure against this event. with with liquid tokens, that exposure is very minimized because you can kind of see how much the collateral would sell for. But for non-fungible tokens, the exposure could be insane.
Right.
Like he gives me at random a 1 of 1, and I have no fucking clue, how much I'm gonna get for it if
Exactly.
he defaults. So like there are different ways to think about this, right? For example, in TradFi, they have this thing called credit default swaps, which essentially is, you can think of it as insurance. This idea that if Matthias were to default on his loan, I would get money, right? I would get like insurance that just somebody else sold to me. So I would pay that person a premium, which is proportional to the credit risk of Matthias, and then there would be like a recovery for them and so on. Like that would be like a full different topic. But in any case, that's the way that like traditionally that product has been thought of. Now in crypto, there's a problem, which is that users are anonymous. So there are many incentives. If somebody sells you insurance on default, people are going to default and claim the insurance. So that system is not scalable for speculators. Like it's, at least maybe I'm wrong. That could be the case. But that's kind of how I think about it. So one way you could insure against this risk is using a different kind of thing, which is essentially letting people speculate on two events. You let people speculate on the credit risk, and then on the price of the asset. So one way to think of it, and Abacus is kind of like in that, I would say, you could push it, and I think if you relax definitions quite a bit, you could even think of Abacus as being in that neighborhood. The idea that Abacus at the core gives us insurance in case, gives us insurance. Like you could think of it as, if Matthias defaults, we go to Abacus and we claim, we have insurance on the value of the collateral. So say, Abacus gives insurance, like the way it kind of works behind the scenes is, it has, Spot has mechanisms that incentivize liquidity pools to fill up right to the point that, they reach what the market price of the collateral. Now, those LPs stake the liquidity for a known amount of time. And so what that allows for Gradient to essentially have insurance on the, because like, here's the thing, we could trigger what would be a credit event. So like we could trigger the closure of the liquidity pool. And what essentially happens is we get all the money in it, but we have to forfeit, we have to like liquidate, like we have to give up the collateral and sell it to Spot that just liquidates it for us. So in other words, like what essentially Spot does is it guarantees a price that they would buy the NFT for. And so against that known price, we give out loans because, we know that we're going to get that money, right? So it's essentially risk-free. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like it works as insurance because, we see that there, 100 ETH locked in Spot, and we know that we could sell the collateral. In the case of a default, we would sell the collateral to Spot for 100 ETH.
Yeah, because really the LPs are taking on the loss of credit default.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. Like it's the idea that you shift the risk from the lending protocol, you shift it to speculators, right? So at the end of the day, it's like an underwriting exercise. It's an exercise where you're passing the risk, right? You pass it to the next person who is willing to take the risk. Obviously, for proportional rewards, right? Which is, eventually, like Spot LPs have to get paid, an APY, which is proportional to both, the opportunity cost of like, a risk-free, LP position, and at the same time, yield, which is proportional to the risk they're taking. So that kind of creates a system where you're essentially shifting, the risk to speculators. And what you do is you shift. The way Spot works is you essentially, I wouldn't say like essentially you shift what would be essentially the risk, because like if a Spot LPs have to speculate on what would be the price of the collateral, right? And so and I've been speaking for a lot, but just they have to speculate on the price of the asset, and And so yeah, so you know that's kind of, yeah, I would say that's kind of how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, trust me, this is a place where you can speak as much as you want. So you don't have to worry about speaking too much. But yeah, no, I mean, that's what I do really like. It's funny, I think, Matthias and I have spent a lot of time talking about Abacus and, all the things that we like about it. And I gotta say, man, you unintentionally, I thought of the same idea of essentially like what, and Matthias and I were just like shooting around ideas for things to build on top of Abacus, and like unintentionally kind of like thought of the same idea as what Gradient's doing. I was like, well, like what if like we could just give loans to any class of NFTs, not strictly blue chips. Like because essentially like through Abacus, it doesn't really matter what the NFT is, as long as someone's willing to start a pool and speculate on the value of the NFT. A lender has 100% safety because the liquidity pool is providing the collateral. Essentially, you're bypassing the NFT. And we're like shooting the shit about that. And then I was like, oh, like what if on the other side, like you could also sell the distressed asset at a discount? And then like, Geo hooks us up and connects us, and I'm looking at Gradient, and then all of a sudden I see like get a loan on any NFT, literally any NFT. And then on the other side, I see buy assets at a discount. And I was like, dude, this guy literally thought of this idea just
Yeah.
way quicker than I did. But yeah, man, it's a really cool idea. I like it a lot. And I know you have a piece of the website. I know it's pretty like bare bones right now, and given everything that's going on in the market, I'm sure that things are going to get delayed a bit because obviously like no one really wants to start a new project, right, or get a new project up and running like right in the midst of everything that's going on. But I know that on the website it says that you can buy assets at a discount, right? And so obviously that those are assets that are being repossessed. And so, NFT lending is super exciting for us. Obviously, with what's been going on in the market, it can definitely make the financialization of NFTs seem a bit daunting and dangerous. But the potential to unlock the time value of money, as Medici says, is attractive given people are, sitting on these intangible assets with utility or lack thereof, and not really reaping any of the benefits of, having that asset. So I guess what do you see as the biggest areas of growth within this like NFT lending space?
Oh, 100%. To be honest, I don't really care about the JPEGs. Like, I'm gonna be like honest, like really honest. Like, I wouldn't say I don't give a shit, because like I care to some extent, right? But I don't personally like. It's not a topic that like captures me. So where I find it really interesting is like not in getting, like a loan against your ape. Again, like I don't really like, I don't really find that exciting, to be honest. Like I think it's interesting, but I don't find it exciting. What I find exciting though is the idea that you can represent financial assets using NFTs. You can say, Matthias takes out a loan, right? And he has debt. And so what I could do is I could sell that as a bond. And then, for example, Medici buys it, and then Medici takes out a loan against Matthias' debt. And the idea that you can build, and I think that's just a profoundly mind-blowing concept, because at the end of the day, it's basically the run-up to the idea that you can build a full-blown financial system using NFTs.
Right. It's like leverage inception. Yeah, no, I mean, it is really interesting. And I think OX Russ posted an article on the financialization of NFTs, and, Matthias and I read it. We had him on the podcast, and that was a big topic for our podcast at the time. And, it kind of got us all thinking like, there's a huge area that's ripe for growth, which is the financialization of NFTs, right? And it can kind of act as this bridge for people that are using DeFi into the NFT space. And so we do find it really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that like, NFTs at the core are just a standard, right? And, like you can represent just basically anything that is non-fungible. And so the idea that you can create financial tools for non-fungible capital, and you represent just like over-the-counter derivatives using like in a non-fungible basis, right? So I think that these are kind of the first steps towards building our very own version of Wall Street. I truly think that we I truly think that this is the, like, perhaps, like the details are not perfect, but I am truly convinced that this is just, directionally correct. Like, this is the way that eventually, if crypto has a full-blown developed financial system, which is on a, I wouldn't say like same level of complexity as as it, exists outside of crypto, but definitely, something pretty sophisticated. That would be the way, like, I see it playing out, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the idea is that at some point it will be as complicated, if not more complicated than actual TradFi systems. But let's say I like to ask this question. I think, especially with these sorts of projects, because it gives the listeners an idea of exactly what they're looking at. So let's say I'm a brand new user, right? I have a random mid-tier asset NFT in a collection with a floor price of, let's say, like 1 ETH, right? So not a blue chip. I want to unlock some liquidity in my NFT, starting with Abacus, right? So starting with Abacus and ending with repaying my loan. Walk me through the process if I'm using Gradient.
Yeah. So, okay. So basically how it works is there are two routes that could work here. I'm going to choose the one that benefits me the most. So the one where I get the most fees, okay? So
I like that.
So you give me your NFT, right? And I deposit that NFT. Sorry, I keep that NFT, right? Now, there's a spot pool for that, right? LP, people essentially speculate on the, you let people speculate on the value of that NFT, right? They get yield, and then so they get what would be, Gio, correct me if I'm wrong, but they get emission credits, and so that would be essentially the name of, they basically get yield in the form of ABC, which is Abacus native, native token. Now, so they get that yield, like basically, if the spot pool, like if the emissions are on, they get that yield. But additionally, say, let's go back to the idea. So we have like two kinds of agents here. We have the NFT owner, and then we have the speculator, right? So, we let speculators fill in, and then on Gradient, like just from the moment that, there's a single speculator adding liquidity, you can get a loan of at most that size. Why? Because in the case of a default, that's the money that we are going to get.
Right. You get the money from the LP.
Yeah. So it's like from a Gradient, like if you isolate everything and you just look at Gradient operates. No, I mean, you could think of the whole system. It's like essentially spot LPs act as a form of lender. And so essentially, we take as collateral what would be, we essentially like, this is obviously relaxing definitions quite a bit, but you can think of it as this idea of taking as collateral our ability to claim the underlying money locked in the spot pool, right? So, say in the spot pool there's 5 ETH, so we can give you a loan of at most, 5 ETH, right? Here's and here it gets really interesting because say, okay, so you deposit your NFT and liquidity adds to spot, and then when you want to take out a loan, two interesting things happen. So on one hand, is like how do you get your loan, right? In which token? Like, do you get it in wrapped ETH, or do you get it in something else? And so this is a really interesting point because the problem with this is like, say there are 5 ETH in spot. If we wanted to give you a loan of 5 ETH, that means that Gradient would need to have its own ETH reserves. And that's a problem because now it means that, Gradient has to like incentivize liquidity and like get its own pools. Like, it's a full-blown different problem. What I thought was like, what if you could use an ETH derivative, like staked ETH, so we essentially mint a new token, which is 1-to-1 with ETH. And that token is backed by the ETH in spot, right? So Now, every loan that we give, so we give you your loan in NFT ETH, which is this, derivative, which is 1-to-1 with ETH, and then you can swap it in the same interface, or somewhere else. You swap it for ETH or whatever. You could swap it via Curve or Uniswap.
Mhm.
You get to choose. Now, okay, so you get your loan. You get your beautiful loan, and then kind of two things could happen, right? So either um, what would be the health factor increases, which is essentially to say that more spot LPs fill up the pool, and like they fill it up at a rate faster. I mean, no. Like you could say like spot LPs add more liquidity, so you essentially can loan. You can essentially borrow more money, right? Because like there's more collateral.
Mhm.
Right? So that's the best case, which is that's a great point, like actually getting loans in a bear market, which is because like the value of the collateral is going to go up, has a higher chance of going up than the
Mhm.
other way. But then the problem is, what if spot LPs begin removing their money? And that's a big problem, because what essentially means is the value of your collateral. You could think of just based on the former assumption of like thinking about like liquid in spot as kind of the collateral.
Mhm.
The value for your collateral is like it's dipping, right? So
Mhm.
you take the risk of, and the problem is, what if eventually like the value of your collateral is less than your balance of debt to the
Mhm.
protocol, right? You owe more money than you have in collateral. And so in that case, like the lending protocol would go underwater. So what grading essentially does is grading can see when spot LP positions are going to expire, like the staking is going to become unlocked. And
Mhm.
right before the staking becomes unlocked, in other words, right before the value of the collateral dips, we check whether after it dips, like your loan is about to go underwater. And if that's the case, we liquidate you.
Right.
But if that's not the case, your position just remains open, interest naturally accumulates, and and eventually, like you can pay back your loan just whenever you want, or you could deposit more NFTs. The point is, you have to protect something which is your health factor. In other
Mhm.
words, at most you can have 1-to-1 ratio between the balance of money that you owe to the protocol and the money that the protocol can get if you default.
Mhm.
Uh,
Essentially a
so that
100% LTV.
exactly, at most 100% LTV.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so will we expect from Gradient, lower rates? Will they be fixed? Like if someone comes in and they want to,
Great question.
yeah, and they want to, let's say they want to take out a loan on their, let's just call it like a 1 ETH floor price NFT. Will they get the same rate as someone that's doing a blue chip NFT? Because I mean, essentially you do bypass the NFT with Abacus. And so are we expecting like these fixed rates being marketed that are going to be lower than like looking at any of the other lending protocols, which obviously right now aren't leveraging something like Abacus, and so the LTVs are lower, the rates are higher because the lenders are taking on more risk. So yeah, if you could just speak a little bit on like the sorts of rates that you think we'll be seeing on Gradient. You don't have to quantify it, but high, low.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So spot LPs get paid in ABC, right? So in
Right.
principle, just assuming like everything goes really well, like spot LPs are gonna get a profit. Like should like in principle get a profit.
Mm-hmm.
Just assuming like assuming like everything just goes well.
Mm-hmm.
I have I have the opinion that I have my opinion is that Gradient will have to boost. Probably, Gradient will have to. My opinion is that Gradient will essentially makes the most sense for Gradient to pay a yield to spot LPs that are providing a loan.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we get that yield from is from the interest rate that we charge borrowers. Now, what yield should a spot LP get? The way I think that makes sense is, we could go back to, right at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about credit default swaps.
Mm-hmm.
The premium for credit default swap is just proportional to the credit risk, to the risk of
Mm-hmm.
the reference entity that just the entity that owns, that owns the debt obligation.
Right. Essentially, what you're saying is the higher the risk of the borrower defaulting, the higher the yield.
Exactly. In spot, it should be a little different because spot LPs are essentially gambling on, they're taking a different kind of risk, which is like they're gambling on the price. So
Right.
they're taking the risk of the NFT eventually being liquidated for less than the price they speculate. In other words, they take the risk of the NFT selling for less than they speculated the NFT would sell for.
Right, and they're rewarded proportionate to the amount of risk that they take on, like the
That's what I think.
The tier of the pool based on, if the NFT ends up selling for more than it was speculated, then that premium that it sells on market gets distributed proportionately, proportionate by risk down to the LP providers.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like it's very hard to quantify. I guess like the idea is that, okay, you say, like you could say, okay, the yield, they get a base yield, which is like obviously a yield which is like has to be like higher than the yield you get from like like risk-free lending. Risk-free yield. So the risk which comes with the yield that comes from the risk should be proportional to the risk. But the question is like, how do we even measure that? Know what I mean? Like, grading gives spot LPs the yield, but proportional to the risk. But I have no fucking clue, like I have no idea. Like I have no idea how risky a spot LP for like, a spot LP that is speculating that an ape is worth 100 ETH. Like I have no idea how riskier that is than a spot LP speculating that the ape is worth 120. It would certainly be less risky, but I have no idea exactly. Like it's very hard to price the risk, and so it's very hard to price the premiums. And so that's a massive problem, I think, because that way, like you cannot really reach what would be like the equilibrium price of like in other words, like my thesis is that at the end of the day, for the right APY, you're gonna have people speculate on anything. So at the end of the day, like this whole system works if you pay people the right way. And so at the end of the day, it's a question of how do you pay people correct? How do you incentivize people to take the risk? And so what we're essentially doing is we're selling the risk to people. So we need to essentially incentivize the other side liquidity. And we do that with the yield. The question is, I have no fucking clue. I have no idea. Like I'm sure, if I were to pay everyone like 1,000,000% APY, most people would buy into like any kind of risk, right? But like I cannot charge the borrower that amount of money, right? Like I need to find a sweet spot, which is the minimum amount of APY that would get spot LPs to buy the risk. But it's the minimum such that we sell that risk and then the borrower does not end up paying unnecessary money.
Right. It's like the maximum amount of risk that a borrower is willing to take.
Yeah, like and so exactly, yeah, and so that's a problem because like the more volatile a floor price is, the riskier it is, right? The easier it is to price an asset, the less risky it should be. But again, how do we find
quantify out that? Yeah.
And like the question is whether we should even try. I don't think we should. I don't think it's worth. Like I don't think like my opinion is like there perhaps other ways to think about these parts of the puzzle. But in any case, like I think it just highlights, the idea that I think this idea of shifting risk works in principle. Like obviously we need to see if everything works in practice. I think it's gonna work. But it's this idea that like at the end of the day, it becomes an underwriting exercise. It becomes an exercise in passing the bag of the risk. And so I need to pay people, like we need to get, we have to keep the show running. You know what I mean? And the way we do that is we pay people. So now the question is like, how much do we pay people? And so, yeah, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. So back to your question, how much are we going to charge people? Truth is, I have no idea. Probably, truth is, this system works very differently than JPEG and other lending protocols. But in any case, my idea is to charge the minimum interest rate that will get you the loan that you want to take.
Right.
I'm going to charge you the least interest rate that will incentivize enough liquidity to back your loan. That's my goal. That's an optimized system, and I want to build I want to build something that works. So like I think that's the best way that it can work, and yeah.
No, that's and I think that's the right way to think about it too. I mean, there is so many moving parts for something like this, right? Like, I mean, first of all, you have Abacus coming in, which, it's easy to make sound simple, but really there's a lot of moving parts there too, right? Like the people providing the liquidity for the pool, the people that are speculating on the price, obviously taking different tiers of risk based on the amount that they think, whatever pool they end up. If they end up in the 0 to 1 ETH pool, that's obviously a lot less risk on an ape than on a, the 100 to 101 ETH pool, and so on and so forth. So there's that, the emissions and
What's even
ABC.
parenthesis, what's even crazier, I think, is
Mhm.
the idea, like what makes it even trickier is the idea that when you stake money, like you're essentially speculating not in the price, like you're speculating that, when you stake for like a week, you're speculating that in that whole week, the NFT is not going to sell for less than that price, which is
Mhm.
different from speculating at a given, like different. One thing is speculating on the spot price, like one thing is speculating on the price in like one thing is speculating in the price in 5 seconds,
Uh-huh.
or like on the price right now for like a very liquid asset that you don't know the price by default.
Mhm.
And a different thing is speculating on the future price, on the price that like an illiquid asset could take in the span of a week or like a month or 2 months.
Mhm.
and and I think that makes it like that increases the baseline of risk that spot LP take. And on the other and on the other side, that's okay in principle, but it means that you're going to have to pay people more because like they're taking more risk. So
Exactly.
that essentially makes like that makes loans a little more expensive. But
Mhm.
again, the question is, you cannot, at the moment, this is service that does not exist. So the question is, how 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 much in fees are borrowers going to be willing to pay?
Mhm.
Because I'm sure that for any, like, I'm sure if you pay speculators any amount of money, like, I'm sure this is going to work out. But again, like, how much appetite do they have for fees,
Yeah,
borrowers?
what's the risk appetite?
Yeah,
No, yeah, I like it a lot. And you know what? I think Gradient has a lot of potential. And kind of with that, I'd ask you, Gradient is what it's marketed as right now, right? Or at least when it first gets its legs under it. But I'm sure you've thought about what this can turn into a year from now. And so, if you could speak a little bit to what you see Gradient looking like a year from now, some ideas that you have in the pipeline, anything you're willing to, any alpha you're willing to leak. We love alpha here,
yeah,
as we've said many times. But yeah, if you could just touch on a little bit about some things that you think are down the line for Gradient.
for sure. So, be completely honest, like,
Mhm.
I'm not really sure what the vibes are gonna be like in 1 year. Like, like, I'm telling you, like, this whole thing began like 3 months ago. Like, three and a half months ago, I had no idea what Aave. Like, I barely knew what Aave was.
Yeah.
So, like, it's very
No, I like
hard.
that. I like that. You move fast. That's one thing that
Like,
I really respect about a lot of. I mean, even the Matthias and I always make the joke that, and everyone kind of makes the same joke that time moves a lot faster in Web3, and it's like uh, 1 week in Web3 feels like a year in real life. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
3 months. 3 months is still a short amount of time, and so that's one thing that I've admired a lot about a lot of the people that we've talked to is how quickly they move. I mean, Matthias is the same way. When he has an idea, he's like, "Well, we got to execute now." Like next day. Like actually, our first episode of the podcast we recorded one day after we talked about doing a podcast.
Nice.
And so it
That's
is one thing
fucking
that I've
love,
definitely
dude. Yeah.
appreciated about the space. But yeah, no. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about what Gradient's going to look like a year from now. It's only been 3 months. So I'm sure you have some ideas.
I Okay, so if what I think would be really cool, like
Mhm.
what my vision is, which is like what my theory about what this could become is, again, like I don't really care about like I think it's cool again, but like the bigger play, in my opinion, is people say the financialization of NFTs, right? I think it's more like the financialization of everything. The
Right.
idea that, this idea that, say you tokenize a kind of Fanta or whatever, you tokenize it, and now that has a market value, right? So you can have people speculate on the market value. So you can collateralize that token and get passive. You take a loan against the token of your Fanta, and then you can get yield from it, because I could put it on a yield earning protocol. So that means that you can essentially get yield. You can essentially get loans against any asset, not just JPEGs, but just get yield against, like I could tokenize a chair, like I could tokenize a chair in my room, or something. Like, I'm not really sure how that could work, but it's the idea that I think we can be way, way more ambitious. I truly believe that the bigger play is building a full-blown financial system on chain, and I think the way you do that is with non-fungible tokens, like over-the-counter derivatives. I think you could do a lot of work in that space.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Diego is all about unlocking the liquidity of not only NFTs but everything, and soon he'll be tokenizing his great grandma and earning
Yeah.
some yield on great grandma, and
So
taking out a loan on great grandma, tokenizing the loan, selling it as a bond. He's
Yeah.
going all the way.
No, it could be. I think it could be like, I think it could be pretty nuts. Like, I have to say, let's entertain that possibility for a moment. They say, yeah, that you tokenize a physical asset and you get yield from it. Wouldn't that create like a vortex? Wouldn't that create like massive, like an influx of just tokenizing physical assets?
Oh yeah. Definitely. I mean, I think people talk a lot about tokenizing like real estate, like essentially like tokenizing deeds.
Yeah, I think it's even more interesting, like the idea of tokenizing assets that in real life, they give you no yield. I don't get yield from my bed. Know what I mean? I don't get yield from my joint. But
Well, you don't get monetary yield from the joint or the bed, but
yeah,
certainly some physical yield.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, but so I think that's really interesting, what I think of gradient, and this is just really, this is alpha in the sense that, as far as as far as we've shared information so far, we're giving out loans to NFTs, right? So but I think what's even more interesting again is this idea of just developing a system, you know what I mean, just using these same tools for bonds and for other things that I think are just truly out of reach right now. Just stuff that I think it's just profoundly changes the game. And this is what I dropped out of college for. And this is the vision that I'm building towards. So we'll see what happens. But I can say, I'm a true believer. I truly believe that this makes sense. And I guess the only option is just doubling down at this point. So yeah, so here we are, straight up.
No, yeah, no. I mean, like I've said before, I do think it's as much as I kid about tokenizing your great grandma and so on and so forth. I do think that the financialization of NFTs, and as you said, like the financialization of everything, is going to create, this vortex, this environment that we're familiar with through the lens of TradFi, but not familiar with through the lens of DeFi. And I think it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for a lot of people, but I think that once everything shakes out and there's some clear winners and the markets has some defined mechanisms, I do think that it is going to be an entirely new place, beautiful and scary at the same time. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity there for a lot of people.
My friend, I vibe hard with those statements. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And so with that, I mean, Oh, sorry.
one
Go ahead, Diego.
one concern that I have is what would be like standard fragmentation.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that a given protocol like oh fuck um, a given protocol defines some given derivative one way, and like I would like in an ideal world people could sell me swaps and could sell me different financial assets. Like it wouldn't just be just protocol A, right? It would be a full-blown system where you could have many people issuing issuing kinds of like different assets. But it would be a problem if every one of these protocols um, was issuing like a different version of the same asset. There would
Mm-hmm.
be like I don't think we're gonna have a system if there's no standardization of there are no standards for the way
Mm-hmm.
we do it. For like there are no financial standards for NFTs. So that's one concern that I have. What would
Mm-hmm.
be fragmentation of a financial system on Ethereum. Um, so I think that's something that like it's worth thinking about.
Right. And you're speaking to like derivatives of derivatives, right? Like just the
Yeah,
so on and
exactly,
so forth until you're just
exactly.
multiple derivatives of the same thing, or
Yeah.
like I said, derivatives of derivatives, just getting to the point where everything becomes so watered down. I mean, it sounds eerily familiar to 2008 here in the US, and it is a little bit scary.
Yeah, it is like what I think. Obviously, this creates the downside is that it creates a contagion contagion risks because
Mm-hmm.
now like the problem at the same time you allow everyone to be connected. So there's like costs are just driven down because there are more agents and like the system works more efficiently, and I would say like works. It would be interesting to like check, see if the economic theory checks out. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be like the net effect would be positive, like it would be really positive. But the downside is, we spread the risk.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's a really tricky question.
No, it
Uh,
is. Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely a rabbit hole, and it's hard to
yeah,
think. It's hard to
it's a
think
lot.
about something that doesn't exist yet. You know what I mean? You can only compare to things that have happened in the real world. But as much as DeFi has many mirror reflections of TradFi, it's not the same space. And
Yeah.
so, as much as we can speculate, things could go one way, or they can go the complete opposite.
Yeah, for sure. Like an interesting example is, as far as I know, like in TradFi, um, I wasn't able to pinpoint. In TradFi, you have a particular thing called contingent creative default swaps, which
Mm-hmm.
is a default swap that speculates on both the credit risk and the price of like something like an index, for example.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, you're speculating on the specific value of the collateral underlying a given loan, which,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I know, um, like I don't think it exists in TradFi. So
Mm-hmm.
this idea, I think it's in many ways, I think it's perhaps a little bold to say that it's a primitive, but it could be. It could be
Mm-hmm.
a new primitive, not just in DeFi, but like perhaps in broader finance. And yeah,
No, it is really interesting. And thank you for walking us through gradient. I mean, like I said, it seems very complex, I think, at the surface level, but the more you think about it, the maybe not simpler is the right way, but the easier it
it's
is to
possible.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like there's
exactly.
just just like the problem about this is like there's just so many moving parts,
Mm-hmm.
and to make the system efficient, like um, there's something like in college, just fun fact. Uh, I was studying math, and I took this really fascinating class about fractals. And
Mm-hmm.
this idea that like obviously this is the most simple fact about fractals. Like you keep zooming in, and you see more of those patterns, right? That idea that there's complexity inside complexity, like
Mm-hmm.
recursive complexity. In gradient, it's not like complexity does not go on forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that like you know to make the system really efficient and optimized, what would be, when you have a puzzle that the puzzle fits in particular, there are shapes like,
Mhm.
when you have cables.
Everything has a place.
Yeah, and like it's very customized. Like it's a puzzle, but the way that the pieces fit in, there are no two pieces that fit in the same way. Because
Mhm.
and so that I think that's like an analogy for grading. That idea that these are these are hard problems to solve, and certainly solutions are simple solutions are not easy to come across. So this is just our attempts, and yeah, it's a little complex, but hopefully in the future, um, we're gonna be able to make it simpler.
Awesome. And with that, I think we can go to some less gradient centric questions if you're comfortable with that. I mean, I'm sure like as a DeFi project owner, project founder, I think that you're well equipped to answer some random DeFi questions that we have. I mean, none of them are going to make you sweat. I
Let's
can assure
go.
you. But yeah, if you could just tell us like your one favorite non-Abacus related DeFi protocol, and one that you think is overrated.
What a great question. Uh, that's so good. Okay, I'm a big fan. There's so many interesting projects, I have to say. I'm a big
Maybe we
fan.
can switch the word favorite with most interesting. That way
Ah,
you don't have to feel like you're giving
yeah,
financial advice.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
um, I think there are many interesting projects. I think um, primitive finance is a really fascinating concept.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Replicating market makers. I've actually been thinking a lot, like a lot about, um, like it goes back to that idea of like how do you bootstrap liquidity on the other, like how do you incentivize liquidity to go in, and there are various ways, and you could think of that, and like there was a point when I was a point as in like 3 weeks ago when I was like, can I use AMMs for this? And so I had a little bit of like, I wouldn't say rabbit hole, because like I'm just way or like super far from being an expert. But I stumbled upon replicating market makers, and which is like for options, right? But um, I just found it a really fascinating concept. I think it's truly a fascinating concept, honestly.
Mhm.
and so yeah, I'm very, I don't really care like if the project makes money or not. I just think it's a really interesting project. Like I think the design, like I think it's just a truly fascinating concept. And yeah, so I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of MetaStreet as well. I think, I think in DeFi there's a lot of bullshitting, myself included, right? I bullshit a lot. Uh,
I mean, that's how you got on. That's how you got into gradient, right?
yeah, like,
I'm
yeah,
just messing with you, but yeah.
100%. I mean, but every now and then, like, like I like to think of that as like a bullshitting ratio. You know what I mean? Like, what
Mhm.
percentage of what you say is made up? And so,
Is it 50-50? What's a good ratio? That's a good follow-up question.
exactly. So, like, I wouldn't be able to. So, in my case, like, lately I've been trying, as I've learned more and more, like, I'm trying to like minimize that. But like, um, but and so now, like, I was in Amsterdam, and so I met some degens in person, and it was interesting, just listening, just hanging out like at a party and hearing people like saying stuff that I was like, no, I don't think this makes any sense. And then going to the party and seeing people having like really interesting debates and like sharing interesting
Mhm.
ideas. And something, and I feel like the guys at Meta Street really get it. Like I feel like David and Connor, there are a few guys in NFT finance at the moment. Like it's probably the people that I think, um, like the people who are shaping NFT finance. I would be surprised if they were more than like 20 guys. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think it's
Yeah.
like it's a couple guys, honestly.
Yeah, I mean that's the
And
nature of the space, right? Like you have so many people getting into NFTs, getting onto projects that don't have, really that experience in TradFi, that are really learning on the go.
yeah,
And the only way that they can give their project any clout is if, they take their time honing their words and they bullshit as much as they can.
yeah, and like that. By the way, that's how I got started. Like, I'm not gonna lie. uh, but like, just in NFT finance, there are really few people. A lot of people, in my opinion, I don't agree. Like, I have fundamental disagreements.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a subset of people who I have admiration for, because I think I feel like the way they see things is like they see. Many years ago, I read this essay about secrets. This idea that the world is full of secrets,
Mm-hmm.
and the secret is, a truth which is non-obvious. A truth that you have to, somebody had to think about to discover.
Mm-hmm.
And a secret is, these secrets, are, as I was saying, are truth, right? And I feel like, there's a subset of people who are really good at finding secrets, and some people just have a lot of them. They know things which make a lot of sense, and and most people just have no idea about those things. I feel like the guys at Metastreet are like that. Like, I feel like they have a really deep understanding of how NFT finance will play out, and I believe they're making, many good bets. And and so I'm a big fan of Metastreet for that reason. um I think the guys running the show, you know they have some good ideas about how things are going to play out. um and so, yeah. And least favorite project, of course, Gradient. Of course.
The one
um
that causes you the most stress. Gradient.
yeah. uh, um That's another great question. Um, okay, I'm gonna be completely honest. Like, I'm not a fan of like, I am not a fan of Ponzi's. I feel uh, like naked Ponzi's, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a different thing is like, uh, having Ponzinomics in your protocol. Like, that's fine, but like, um, I feel like I'm just not a fan of, like, protocols that are just pure Ponzi's, which we've seen so often, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
it's a very, very normie take, but
Well,
it's-
where do you draw the line usually? Like, because you're saying like there's so many Ponzi, like, I mean, incentive mechanism is kind of just like the
yeah,
nice way of saying Ponzi, like, but it does work. Like, there's a lot of good protocols that have kind of bootstrapped, but then
yeah,
also there's a lot of good protocols or bad protocols that have bootstrapped into the ground. So, like, where do we draw the line?
yeah. That's a question. Yeah, it's not a line. It's a gradient, my friend.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't be able to say. So, let's just say that the protocols that we don't like are the protocols that go to zero. The protocols that
I like that.
go.
Anything not my bag, 0. Anything that I own, 100. Just that's my favorite. Whatever I own. Ones I hate, things that I don't own. That's it.
So the question
Yeah.
is, like, I pass. What would be, I let my bank speculate on the answer. So it's another thing I'm not a fan of is, I feel like crypto had an influx of normies, and I feel like many of the things that they're doing are a little cringe. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
gonna lie, I feel like many DAOs don't, like, they're nice experiments, but I feel like many of them are a little cringe.
Yeah.
And
What's
Yeah.
more cringe though? Like people, the normies coming in, or would you rather have more Ponzi's and less normies, or more normies and cringe and regulation, like that kind of stuff?
let's fucking go the Ponzi's, my friend, because the
I like it. Keep crypto weird. No, I mean, yeah, I totally get
yeah,
that because you see some of this, like, people come in with, I think DAOs can work, and I think there's a viable way to do it, but people are like, oh, everyone, everybody should be voting on every little proposal, like, $2,000 for a website designer or something. The whole community has to vote for it. It's like, that's just so slow. It's ridiculous.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that like yeah, I mean that's how it like I miss I'm gonna be completely honest. I think the ICO craze was actually fun. Like it was nuts, but it was some guy on Twitter was I over the last couple hours just following this craze. It felt a lot more like crypto than Web3, and I long for those days. And and so that's how I feel. The Ponce is, I just think of that. Like I low key find I am chill with them. Like, I don't really give a fuck. Like honestly, it's like I whatever you want. Know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
think they're cringe, so I'm good with it. But then on the other hand, with the things that are cringe, then yeah, like I would say they bother me a little. Um,
Yeah, I think the
yeah,
things that are opt-in feel a little bit easier. Like, like if you know it's a Ponzi, or like let's say there's a terrible protocol or a couple terrible protocols, you don't have to buy in. You know what I mean? You can kind of just like ignore it. But the normies coming in, like writing like threads on why, we need like massive regulations, and like it should be illegal to lose money and stuff. You're like, okay, this is just like, you know, this is just
yeah.
cringe.
Yeah, I think that another interesting point is um, I feel like DeFi ideally should run more on public goods.
Mhm.
Um, I feel that my vision for Gradient is that it's just at the end of the day, this financial system, it operates like the different parts like operates public goods, and I don't know. I feel like there are many interesting, you know, Gradient is a very opinionated project. It's there's a lot of ideology behind different decisions, which is permeate also like protocol design and architecture. The ideas of even just cyberpunk, just ideals, right? And and so I believe that I feel like protocols have an identity, and yeah, they have a
Yeah.
different, each protocol has its own vibe, and I don't even know where I was going, by the way.
But it's awesome because you can just like vibe with whatever protocol you kind of. That's what's so amazing. I think it's like crypto is like a long street of different restaurants. Like if you like,
Yeah,
Chinese food, there's a protocol there. You want like a super based
Love that
protocol where
analogy.
they're just like, yeah, exactly, right? Like, and there's like Mexican food over here, and there's like a good rib joint over there. Like it's just
Yeah.
there's so many. There's something for everybody. But I'm curious. How do you think public goods should be paid for? Like, how do we? I think that's like always
yeah.
kind of a big question. Like, everybody wants public goods. I think everybody kind of agrees that and DeFi is, I think, a public good. But how do we get it paid for?
That's a great question.
Ideas, suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, such a good question.
Should it be like
I
a tax kind of thing? Or I mean, I know Ethereum also is always having trouble like paying their developers and their core devs enough. There's always like that debate, like they're not being paid enough, and you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, it's tough to answer. I mean, for example, say, yeah, it's a problem.
What would you do if like if you ran Ethereum, or if you ran a protocol that was doing like a DeFi public good? How would you kind of structure it, or have you thought about that much?
I actually haven't thought about it that much,
Hmm.
but just a random take about it. But like, something just an interesting heuristic that sometimes you could use something that I could use. I try to use sometimes is this idea that sometimes you can align incentives so well. So like, say you have a public good which is just so core to some other devices that profit off of it, that those that infrastructure built on top, it's just essentially forced to pay for the development and just sustainability of the underlying infrastructure or whatever.
Hmm.
um, I'm very curious about how, because like, yeah, it is a very tricky problem. I know that Vitalik, has thought a lot about this. I would say it's one of the big problems that crypto has. Like I remember seeing a list a couple of weeks ago that was, you know, big open problems in crypto, and this for sure is one of them. How do we find ways to fund public goods? Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I,
no, I mean
I
it's an
wouldn't
interesting question. I don't think we'll solve it in the next 10 minutes for sure, but it's always kind of funny, like because the incentives are so it's just crazy. Like, if you used to work at the Ethereum Foundation or you're a core dev, like obviously any protocol would love to have you. So then, as protocols get a big war chest or something, it would hire you for, as much money as you'd want. So then it's kind of like a duty bound issue. Like people must then stay on kind of more duty bound or feeling like, oh, okay, I owe it to Ethereum. You know what I mean? Like idealistic drives, incentives.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah, totally. And you could think of that as a form of bias, even because you're not
Hmm.
following what would be economic incentives. Rather, you're like it's a weird thing where that idea of like economic incentives kind of blends. I'm sure if you
Hmm.
paid, you know, devs like $1 billion per year, like they would leave 100%. It's like, they have elasticity in that they have sensitivity to every additional dollar that you offer them. But they have a different elasticity in that they're less sensitive because of ideology and ideals than other devs.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's a really interesting example, I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I know in the Cosmos ecosystem you could do stuff, but maybe once it's proof of stake Ethereum. But if you run, once proof of stake, it's Ethereum's proof of stake. Maybe they run validators, and people that really want to do, back up the validators, they can stake to them or to core devs. Um, yeah, or they
Yeah.
just start protocols, get
I
super rich, and then they do it for fun. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, an interesting thought experiment is, if you can create like a culture where people are, that idea that you have, say, etiquette, or just thinking about real life, uh,
Social pressure. We bully them
yeah,
into it. We cyberbully them into staying on as devs. I like it.
cyberbully them into, funding public goods.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious about how you know you could leverage culture, and this
Mhm.
is a really big a very interesting point of view, is thinking about blockchains as economies and different cultures, different communities with different values, and it would be really interesting as a thought experiment. What if you had blockchain with a given culture that just exercise a lot of pressure into where the expectation is supporting public goods,
Mhm.
and if that's the case, then again you play like economic incentives are bended are bent, sorry.
Yeah, I,
um
I think that happens to some degree kind of with Bitcoin and running a
yeah,
node or, doing home mining and stuff like that. And um, I think
yeah,
we could see that maybe in another protocol or another way. What do you think about the idea that as crypto grows, we might see some TradFi like attacks? I think some people were calling this one on this attack on Luna, like basically like TradFi major, or well, at least that's the conspiracy or the idea is that basically like a huge hedge fund took a ton of money and crashed it essentially on
yeah.
purpose while shorting. Do you think something like that will happen more in the future? Or do you think it's just Luna and that's how, or just that, the economics of Luna? Or what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think an interesting question could then be, how as crypto grows, how like is this pressure gonna not metamorphosize into TradFi attacking us, but rather like antagonizing TradFi by
Mm,
DeFi people? Because in other words, is this ideological friction gonna translate into some form of like financial violence?
yeah.
And And it's such a good question. And I think that, you know, like I'm curious about how, as crypto grows, regulation will also evolve. So I, it's a, TradFi people are especially playing at waltz with regulators. So,
Mhm.
um, assuming that, like circumstances allow them to make attacks, um, the question is whether economic incentives are high, assuming that they are acting rationally, right?
Mm.
Whether economic incentives are high enough for them to um, carry out these attacks. And
Yeah.
that's the question. Um, I would probably say no, because
Mhm.
I think that I think obviously this I feel like every time these attacks are carried out, like of course say hypothetically they can make a shit ton of money, but
Mhm.
they can only be so sustainable because obviously regulators then come in and like I and then like obviously like um good I would say goodwill to some extent is still kind of relevant. I would probably say that I'm not sure. Like, obviously, like as crypto grows over the long term, like the frequency of this is gonna, the same way that you have rugs. Rugs are gonna occur more. You're gonna have more rugs because you're gonna have more people, and you're gonna have, like, you know what I mean? Like when
Yeah,
you
more participants. So then there's just like if there's
exactly.
one out of every 100 people is bad, now we have 1,000 people. Now there's 10 bad people or whatever it is. You
Yeah. So
know.
a scale of the long term increase, like probably,
Mhm.
you're like it's I don't know, like there's so many different ways which you could look at it, and it's hard to weigh, each different point of view against each other.
Yeah.
But I guess the bottom line is, even if I think it's just something that is gonna, if anything, it's probably gonna characterize like early stage crypto. But I don't
Mhm.
see these I, also, maybe, yeah, like depends on how the narrative plays out. Like question is like in 10 years, for example, what's going to be the relationship between DeFi and TradFi? My opinion, and this is my very uninformed position, is that perhaps, we're going to have like some blockchains which are, like Ethereum, just fully unregulated. And then you're going to have some other blockchains that act as a trustless layer for particular, which are endorsed by particular regulators, and so they can be used by TradFi.
Mm.
Like US banks use a particular settlement layer, which provides a lot of the benefits that just crypto provides, but which is approved by the SEC, and
Yeah.
it's just
So you don't
managed by
think ETH will kind of be adopted? Like it'll be some other TradFi approved. It won't be like, JP Morgan is now using ETH as a settlement layer.
it. Maybe that's another great question. Like
Mhm.
the truth is, in the real world, everyone uses the same internet protocols, right?
Yeah.
um, so that deal, like you could make the same case for Ethereum, like maybe everyone is going to end up using ETH, and then um like repercussions of doing things that would be considered legal happen off chain.
Mhm.
uh, Another interesting thing is seeing how things played out with the internet, that you ended up with the dark web, which is accessed by particular with a particular browser.
Yeah.
And question is, are we going to have a same thing for Ethereum, right, where we have a proxy? Like maybe like so many, like you have to like really speculate a lot. um it's a great question. I
Yeah.
think it's
No
really
worries.
tough. Yeah, but in any case, I would say it's a possibility that I am an ETH maxi. I
Mhm.
am I am truly yeah, I'm an ETH maxi, but at the same time, like I am curious to see whether how it's gonna play out with TradFi, because truth is, most of the capital is there right at the moment. Like it's just like the
Yeah.
scale is like just Like it just like that's what that's where the money is, right? And so we need to think, how do we bridge that capital into um just blockchain systems. And yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Hearing you talk made me think, like, with more regulation and stuff like that, or more scrutiny on the ETH network, or the ETH blockchain. I wonder if down the road they'll look and see that, like, MEV attacks or sandwich attacks or whatever were actually like highway robbery. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, who know? I mean, I could totally see an argument for that. Like, essentially, let's say you're just standing outside of a store. It's like putting you're just putting your own, like, you're basically robbing them on the way to the the bank, and then just giving them some back, like, without them really even knowing.
Yeah, no, it's fucked up. I mean, it's fucked up
Mm,
the idea that to what extent is the infrastructure. The idea that you may have some incompatibility between, the infrastructure and, the kinds of regulations that just different these countries may want.
Hmm.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, like it's a good question. I mean, I think it's another side to the multi-chain thesis, which
Mhm.
is like not necessarily in making a better user experience. Just lower transaction fees, faster. Like just faster blocks as well. Like it's this idea of to what extent um, will ETH be adopted by SEC compliant firms.
Hmm. Yeah,
That,
no, I think that was all. Wow, Matthias just coming in and asking the big questions. No, I think that was I think that was all. That was all. Really valid. I think going back to Matthias's point about TradFi attacks and DeFi and whatnot. I mean, I think, like, if you think of crypto as like a living, breathing organism, and Web3, DeFi, whatever, as a living, breathing organism, like, of course it's going to grow, it's going to get older, it's going to become more complex and more sophisticated in a lot of different ways, and on that same note, it's going to learn, right? So I think that TradFi attacks will continue. Maybe the frequency will change, but as it becomes more complex and people learn, projects learn, users learn, um, maybe the attacks won't become more infrequent, but they will change. And I think it's just going to be like the growing pains of the space.
yeah, I mean, I think you could even think of like these TradFi attacks as a TradFi firm just trying to make a quick buck, which is
Yeah.
like to some extent, like, who am I to judge? Um, it's interesting, like the circumstances in which they do so. Um, like they lend themselves to ideological interpretations.
Hmm.
Um, but I think you're right on. I mean, this idea that as crypto increases in complexity, there are going to be more opportunities for TradFi firms to make a lot of money, and
Hmm.
some of these are going to be quite questionable, right, from like a moral perspective.
Right.
um, and yeah.
It's just going to be getting to the point where either someone steps in and regulates, or getting to the point where, projects as a whole or in the majority have learned, and those attacks become maybe a lot less possible, which is what we're all hoping for, right?
Yeah,
No more, no more Luna days, no more sad days for
absolute
us.
fact, my guy. Yeah.
Up only from
Anyways,
here, right?
yeah,
I mean,
exactly,
can't go.
exactly.
Who's
Anyways,
catching
with
these
that,
knives?
I think we hit the hour 20 mark. So pretty impressive,
Perfect.
Diego, on your end. Thanks for joining us, man. No, I mean, I feel like at this time, everyone's forgot that they got on the podcast to listen to about Gradient, and we're hitting that hour and 20 mark. But yeah, dude, thanks for walking us through Gradient. The project is awesome. It's going to be built using, it's going to leverage Abacus, which Matthias and I have talked a lot about. We're both huge fans of. So I think that it's going to do some big things in the space, and hopefully you knock some of the bigger lending protocol players on their toes, and they have to roll with the punches, or lose out. So I'm excited for you, man, and thanks for joining us.
Let's fucking go. Thank you so much, guys, for having me. I had a solid time, and those questions were fucking great. Like, I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna after this, I'm probably gonna go smoke a joint or something and just ponder. Like,
Perfect.
I
Then
heard
you got to
the-
come tell us the answers. Tell us
I
what you
heard
come
the-
up with it.
I heard the lighter in the background, man. I know you're already smoking that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just setting the stage for some deep.
that was for the candles.
thought.
That was the candles, right?
Yeah.
Just yeah.
little seance going on in the background. I love
Yeah.
that.
Just setting the mood.
Yeah, but
Thanks.
Oh, man.
thanks for joining, Diego. We appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
appreciate
Have a good one, eh?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
too.
you too. Bye.